So when Bonnie Raitt saying, let's give them something to talk about, I don't think she was talking about your business exactly, but there's no denying that word of mouth is the one marketing strategy every small business wants working for them. But here's the deal. Wanting people to talk about your business in a positive way is one thing, and getting people to rave about your business in a relevant way has proven to be a big challenge for Main Street businesses. I'm Ivana Taylor, and today on Bizapalooza Chat, we're going to uncover the secret to getting people to talk about you and your business in a relevant way. Those are the important phrases. So our guest today is author and small business expert Jay Baer. You may recognize his name from Hug Your Haters, but his latest book, Talk Triggers, the complete guide to creating customers with word of mouth. He's exploring the opposite side of the spectrum. And in just a minute, he's going to take you through the process of identifying and leveraging those mystical talk triggers that will not only get people talking about you and your business, but to turn that talk into actual sales. So I'm so excited to welcome my friend and expert, Jay Baer. Hi, Jay.
How you doing? Thanks so much for having me.
I'm happy to have you. I'm so glad you write books, because otherwise I even missed you at Content Marketing World. That was so sad.
I'm always around, in and out.
In and out, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about this. You said something in the book that I thought was brilliant, and I'm sure a lot of people missed it. What's the difference between being social and doing social? I think that's the root of the conversation today.
Well, I think about being social as engaging with people, with customers, in an authentic way for the purpose of engagement. And then hopefully that engagement at some point down the road yields to a desirable business outcome. I feel like doing social is the opposite. It's let's figure out the desirable business outcome and then reverse engineer our engagement accordingly. We only engage if we have something to gain. And you know, that's why I always tell people, especially small business owners or sole proprietors who always bemoan like, oh, I don't have time to do social or whatever. And I'm like, look, here's the deal. Find one piece of the social media ecosystem that you like. Because if you don't love social media, you suck at social media. Like there's no middle ground there. Because if you feel like every time you post something and it's like a duty or a job, you're not going to do it very often. You're not going to do it very well. So there really is something to that I find that people who are, not always, but in many cases, the people who are the best, however you want to quantify that, at social media are those who just really like to engage with people. And that just manifests itself in these platforms.
Yeah, the reason I said this was the crux to the whole thing is, I don't know how many of these books I have read and reviewed in the last few years, and we all want people, we want to go viral. We want people talking about us. And I think most other books, you know, they kind of leave you saying, yeah, I want that, but they don't leave you with like a way to get that. And one of the things I liked about this particular book is that you really did go through a process of identifying this differentiator. And I got to tell you, a lot of small businesses I work with just get stuck. And I think this is related to the being part. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems like the folks you picked in here, well, I know they didn't all, but like, you know, they didn't go from having no personality to having personality. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't even need personality necessarily to be good at word of mouth. It doesn't hurt, but it's not a requirement. And in the book, Talk Triggers, we're not suggesting, this is not about going viral. This is not about buzz. It's about a word of mouth strategy, which is incredibly important because depending on what your business type is, between 50 and 91% of all sales are influenced by word of mouth. Yet nobody has an actual strategy for it, right? So you've got probably a marketing strategy, you might have a social media strategy, you might have a public relations strategy, whatever. But nobody has a word of mouth strategy. We just take it for granted. We just assume that our customers will talk about us, but will they? And what are they saying exactly? So what this book is it's a recipe book. It's how to create a differentiator that your customers will talk about online and offline every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year. Not we're going to rent an elephant and walk it down Main Street and have a bunch of people tweet about that on Thursday. That can work. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't rent an elephant, but I'm suggesting that renting an elephant is not a word of mouth strategy, right? That is a lottery ticket. That is a stunt. That is a publicity stunt. And this is a book that's not about publicity stunts. This is a book about adding strategic operational thinking to the creation of conversations.
So does your differentiator find you, or do you find your differentiator?
Great question. As a practical matter, sometimes it finds you and you just sort of say, hey, this is a thing that we do differently. And it turns out people talk about that. But the reality is that most companies don't do that. Most companies do the opposite. They play follow the leader. They say, I don't want to be different. I want to be the same. And same is lame. That doesn't actually work. At least it doesn't work to create conversation. So there are definitely some companies, and some we talk about in the book, that sort of just the nature of their business created conversations. But most people don't do that, and most people can't do that, which is why, as you mentioned, we have a very specific 6-step process in the book that helps you figure out what your differentiator can and should be. And I will tell you that it's the exact same process, exactly the same, that we use in my consulting firm, Convince and Convert, when we create these kind of word-of-mouth strategies for businesses all over the world. It's like we just basically took what we do every day and put it into a book and gave it away.
So let's review that process a little bit, because
Sure.
As we're talking, I'm sort of thinking of a few folks that nobody knows about, right, that have really struggled with this process. So let's just do like a quick summary of what they're going to find in the book of this process.
The book is actually broken down into the 4, 5, 6 framework. So it's the 4 things that your differentiator must include. Then there are 5 different types of differentiators. So one is talkable generosity, being more generous than your customers expect. That creates conversation. One is being talkably useful, being more useful than your customers expect. That creates conversations, etc. There's 3 others. So 4, 5, and 6 is the 6-step process for how to create a talk trigger, test it, measure it, etc. So the best way to start that process is not, well, let me say it this way. Here's the worst way to do this. The worst way to do this is how everybody tries to do this, which is they say, Jay, great idea. We should come up with a differentiator so our customers tell each other about us. That's a good plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get everybody together on Monday, and we're going to get in a conference room, and we're going to brainstorm and come up with a really good idea. If it was that easy, you'd already have one. The much better approach is this. First thing, document your customer journey map. So you have to identify all the different inflection points and touch points you have with your customer. Website, social, walk-in, phone call, email, like whatever. Document all that stuff. Second step, do interviews with 3 different types of customers. New customers, longtime customers, and lost customers. You want to interview like 5-ish of each of those batches. There's like 15 interviews, give or take. And what you're doing in those interviews is you're saying, okay, here's all the touch points. You went to the website, and then you called us, and then we called you back, and then we gave you a proposal, and then you looked at the proposal, and then we gave you a contract, like all blah, blah, blah. In each of those steps, what did you expect would happen? Because what you're trying to figure out is your customer expectations map. Because once you know what people expect of you, you by definition know what people do not expect of you. And that gap between what they expect and what they don't expect, that's where your differentiator lies. That's where the gold is, right? So it's like when you're panning for gold, right? You can't be under the bedrock, but you can't be at the surface. It's in between, right? And once you understand that, then you come up with some ideas and test them and roll them out and sort of the other more specific elements of the process. But that's the key is to talk to customers and figure out what they expect. So I'll give you an example from my business. Like a lot of B2B consultancies, we give people a proposal. And that's one of the key inflection points with the customer. Well, if you ask a customer, like people we work with, what do you expect would happen when you get a proposal? They will say, well, in this day and age, I suspect that you will save that proposal off as a PDF. You will email it to me, and then later on we'll have a conversation about it. That's pretty much what people expect. We don't do this, but we should. But what if instead you sent your potential customer a sheet cake, and the icing on that sheet cake was designed to look like the cover of your proposal? The proposal itself was actually printed out and put into a laminated plastic sleeve underneath the cake. Therefore, in order to access your proposal, your potential customer had to eat an entire sheet cake. Now, would that be different than what they expect? Yes. Would that be something that would create conversations? Yes.
Because they would say your proposal was full of sheet.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. That's very, very good.
See, you thought of it. You thought of it.
That's good.
No, actually, that's funny that you mentioned that, because while I don't do a tremendous amount of consulting, I do some consulting. And one of my differentiators is I don't do proposals.
See, there you go.
I just don't. Because like, I know that in 30 seconds, you either want to work with me or you don't want to work with me. So like,
yeah,
let's say yes, no. That doesn't mean that no documents exchange hands.
Sure, of course.
But, it's just like a little bit different. So I really love that. So, and I love this core of the proposal. I love how you laid this out, because I think that's every small business, the people that are struggling with this that I know of, I think can do this. I think, they might have done some customer interviews. Everyone can do this.
Everybody. I mean, I spend 3 or 4 days a week talking about this in front of hundreds or thousands of mostly small business owners. And I can tell you, everybody can do this. It's just sitting down and doing it, right? And taking the time to do it.
That's what stops them, I think. I think, why is it that everyone would rather struggle and beat their head against the wall than sort of...
I don't know that they would rather. I think it's people believe 2 things that are not true. 3 things that are not true. One, they believe that competency creates conversation. That if you are a good business, that your customers will tell people about you. But that's not really how the world works. Because A, your competition is all good as well, or they wouldn't be in business. So it's not like you're noteworthy because you're, good. And also, it's to some degree how we're wired as people. Like, I don't know everybody watching. I'm sure I know some of you, but I know this to be true. Nobody has ever said, hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had. Like, we don't say that because it's a terrible story, right? And word of mouth strategy is all about creating stories. And nobody tells that boring of a story, typically, right? So competency isn't the answer. That's the first mistake. Second mistake is this idea that same is lame, right? That plain follow the leader and best practices and let's do it how the best companies in our industry do it. That's a good idea operationally, maybe, but it's not a good idea for word of mouth. Because again, people discuss different and they ignore average. And the third thing that people get wrong is they feel like social media equals word of mouth. And it's not the same thing, right? Social media is a conduit for word of mouth. Word of mouth is about a story. Social media is not about a story any more than television is about cops, right? It's just a conduit, right? Social media is just a vehicle. And so people say, well, we're really good on Facebook, therefore we have a word of mouth strategy. No, you have a good Facebook page. That's not the same thing, right? So people kind of have confused the story and the delivery mechanism over the last 10 years or so. And I think that is why people say, well, I don't need a word of mouth strategy. Now you kind of do.
Well, Jay, I have to confront you with this. I think you're not helping. I think you're not helping because we have several distinctions that are important to make. You've made some of them already, right? But what's the difference, right? Because we already talked about like a word of mouth strategy is not going viral. I think a lot of people collapse all these things, right? This idea of going viral, getting people to talk about you, and word of mouth. And then this new thing that you brought to the game, this talk trigger. I have a feeling that my sense is that this is even different from word of mouth.
Yeah, so the talk trigger, great, good point. So the talk trigger is the story, right? So word of mouth is about stories. talk trigger is the story. It's like, what are you talking about, right? So the thing that you do different that people notice, that's the talk trigger, because it triggers talk, right? And the talk is the word of mouth. Social media is just one of the ways that that talk gets distributed, right? So it could be face-to-face, it could be via email, it could be via tweet, it could be an Instagram recommendation. It really doesn't matter. It could be skywrited, it could be a hostage note. It doesn't really matter. It's just that the story gets told. And just fun fact, apropos of nothing, the data show that about 50% of all word of mouth is online and about 50% is offline. So it's about the same. It works a little differently though, because the online word of mouth, social media, Yelp reviews, what have you, spreads faster. It's the nature of the medium, right? A lot of people can see your tweet at one time. Offline word of mouth, goes slower because typically it's onesie twosie. It's, there's a handful of people around, or maybe it's just you and I. So you're not going to reach as many people instantaneously. But the research shows that offline word of mouth, when we're standing around, right, and saying, hey, have you ever ridden this bicycle? Or that's a weird analogy, whatever. That has higher persuasive power, right? So you will take that recommendation more seriously than you will social media, just because of the intimacy of sort of being in a shared environment, that kind of thing. So both are important. They just work slightly differently.
And you've made me think about something, a really fascinating conversation I had, and I can't remember if it was here or like in real life, but it was the circumstance where someone had made a recommendation to use a company.
Mm-hmm.
And that person went to check out their website. So remember, personal recommendation, like neighbor to neighbor.
Yep.
Hey, who did your roof? Joe Smith did my roof. It was amazing. You should have him do your roof too.
Yeah.
So this person goes online, goes and finds Joe Smith's company, sees no reviews, chooses somebody else. What is that?
Yeah. Well, intensity of recommendation can be defeated by quantity of recommendation, or in this case, lack thereof. If you said this guy's great at roofing, the no reviews is interesting because it might be a new company. I don't know the particular circumstances. And it's not like people who get their roofs done are like, let me review you instantaneously. It depends. Anyway, I can see a more likely scenario being, I had a really good experience with this person for whatever reason. And then I go to Google and I search the name, and the average review score is 1.7 or something, across like 20 or 30 reviews. And then you're like, well, wait a second. My friend had a good experience, but clearly a bunch of other people didn't. So which of these is the outlier, right? At which point you're like, well, math would suggest that my friend's experience is atypical because he is a 4 or a 5. And then you've got 27 people who are an average of 1.7. You're like, yeah, no. And what happens then is you stop trusting your friend because the next time, like I've got a buddy, really good friend of mine for 30 years, right? Very smart guy. He is ironically a director, does television commercials and movies and stuff. Yet it's a real puzzlement. He has terrible taste in movies. It's like really lowbrow, like in a way that, put it this way, one of his favorite movies is Dude, Where's My Car? Which by any measure is not a good movie, but yet is one of his favorites. So when you get to know people better, this is kind of how it works, right? You say, okay, I trust this person for recommendations about this, but not about movies, right? So what you could have is a circumstance where like, I trust this person for recommendations on yard work, but definitely not on roofing. And, we see this in review sites a lot. Like think about TripAdvisor. So you look at TripAdvisor and somebody is like, this is the greatest hotel I've ever stayed in. And then you're there, you're like, okay, either my experience was atypical, their experience is atypical, or this person stays in very few hotels, right? So they're grading on a curve somehow, right? You see that sometimes, like, wait a second, this Holiday Inn is not 5 stars. Like, I don't know what you're thinking, but whatever. Just interesting.
And I think that, as I was thinking about this, and just as you said all of this, it occurred to me that this is one step closer. Following this talk triggers process just brings you one step closer to controlling that, right? To making sure you're being that folks are at least focusing on what you want them to focus on.
I'm always suspicious of control in marketing because I think it's something that we desire but cannot have. But what I will tell you is when you implement the talk trigger system, what it allows you to do is word of mouth on purpose instead of what happens today, which is word of mouth on accident. And maybe it's just that I've been a strategist for 30 years, but if I have a choice, I'm going to do something on purpose that I know what's going to happen, or at least I have an ability to incentivize or create a pattern of behavior, as opposed to, well, let's just kind of go about our business and hope that people talk about us. I don't run companies based on hope and lottery tickets. Although maybe I should. Maybe I should though, because what was the lottery, like $4 billion or some damn thing today? Something crazy.
No, I think that was the
one.
Take
it all back. No, I changed. I'm going to buy. Cancel this. I'm going to buy lottery tickets.
Tickets, right? No, I completely agree with you, because it's astonishing to me how many people use word of mouth as their primary way of getting business and referrals, and yet they treat it like a happy accident. And I think that was one of the things that endeared me to this particular book, is that it wasn't an accident. Right. And I think it's probably the closest thing I've seen that would allow any small business. And I mean, I'm not just talking about like restaurants and salons or whatever. I'm talking about like the most, no offense to anyone, but I know folks
lawyers, we got lawyers, doctors, plumbers, realtors,
exactly,
dog walkers. Like, it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't
software
matter.
That's used in a teeny tiny niche.
I mean, my wife's a yoga teacher and she's putting these principles into practice. Like, it doesn't matter.
It's, what? It's occurring to me that if you love the idea behind Blue Ocean strategy, this is a much more accessible way to get there.
Yeah. And also, not only is it helpful to think of it that way, but also it gives you a framework for doing something about it. Right. Mm-hmm. So Blue Ocean's sort of about positioning, and then like, okay, position yourself. And this is about, okay, do something different, but here's actually how. And that's, I mean, look, here's the deal. Like there's a ton of great books about word of mouth out there, right? Like Fizz from Ted Wright, who wrote Our Forward, Contagious by Jonah Berger, Word of Mouth Marketing by Annie Cernovitz, Anatomy of Buzz by Emmanuel Rosen, and a bunch of others, right? My friend Sally Hogshead, her books are at least at some level about word of mouth. So the world did not need Daniel and I to write a book about word of mouth and to say, hey, word of mouth is important, because those books have been written. And most of those folks contributed to this book as well. But what we did was say, yeah, it's important, and here's what to do about it. So, that's the part that I think is the most helpful. And then obviously a ton of really interesting examples that are there's a lot of variety there and different types of companies. So what we really, really wanted to do, to your point, Ivana, was to say, it's super important for us for people to read this book and say, I can see myself in doing this. What we didn't want was to write a book that said, let me show you how Apple does it, or Zappos or Amazon or whatever, which A, those are tropes now. It's so beat to death. But B, most companies aren't that, and they're not going to be able to do that. So we tried to really balance the example so that certainly small companies can be inspired, but big companies as well, which is typically who we work with.
Well, Jay, thank you very much. Hey, everyone, get yourself over to Amazon, get yourself over to the website. All the links will be in the show notes. So we're headed over to Twitter to chat about talk triggers and get people talking about your business. Thank you for being here, Jay.
You bet. There's a talk trigger about the book. There's a talk trigger about talk triggers. Oh. On the back of the book, it says, satisfaction guaranteed. Yes. Right down there where the alpaca is. If you bought this book and didn't like it, go to talktriggers.com and leave the authors a note. That's me. And they will buy you any other book of your liking. And we will. So here's the deal. If you buy the book and you don't like it, which I think you will, but if you don't, just let me know. And I will literally buy you any book. You want a first edition Bible? We'll figure it out. Literally, we don't care. So there is 0% risk to buy this book, because if you don't like it, we'll give you your money back and then some. So make it happen.
And there you have it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Jay Baer, thank you so much. And thank you for putting this together for us. Why did you choose alpacas over llamas?
It's a story that has both more and less information than you might expect. The original cover that Daniel and I had for the book was just not very good, and we thought, this is a book about word of mouth. Therefore, maybe we shouldn't have just like the regular book cover. And so I was just kind of messing around, and I gave him something. He's like, yeah, that's not exactly it. And then he just found that image of the two alpacas talking to one another, and he just mocked that up, and he sent it to me. And I was like, I think it's awesome, but there's no way our publisher will approve that. And he's like, well, let's just send it to them and find out. And I'm like, all right. So we sent it to them, to Penguin, and they're like, yeah. And we're like, yeah. And they're like, yeah. And we're like, yeah. And they're like, yeah. And so there you have it. So he literally just found the picture.